Have you ever wondered why certain people keep showing up in your life with the same patterns, the same energy, the same lessons? Or why some days reality feels fluid, almost dreamlike, while other days it feels concrete and immovable? What if I told you that the answer isn't out there in the external world, but within the very structure of your consciousness itself? We're going to explore something that challenges everything you think you know about reality. Not through abstract philosophy, but through the intersection of ancient wisdom, quantum physics, and direct human experience. And by the end of this conversation, you might find yourself questioning the very nature of who you are and what you're capable of. Let's start with a simple observation. Every morning you wake up, look in the mirror, and see a person you recognize as yourself. But what you're actually seeing is far more complex than a physical body reflected in glass. You're looking at a multidimensional being who exists simultaneously across layers of reality that your conscious mind has been trained to ignore. The human experience, as we typically understand it, is confined to what we call the third dimension. This is the realm of solid matter, linear time, cause and effect. You touch a hot stove, you get burned. You plant a seed, it grows into a tree. Everything follows predictable mechanical rules. And for most of your life, you've been taught that this is the only dimension that matters, the only one that's real. But here's where it gets interesting. Mystics, physicists, and consciousness researchers have been saying for decades, even centuries, that this three-dimensional reality is just one frequency among many. Think of it like a radio. When you tune into 95.3 FM, you're not hearing all the other stations that exist simultaneously in the same space. They're all there, broadcasting their signals, but you're only perceiving one at a time. Your consciousness works the same way. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're tuned into a specific frequency of experience. But there are other frequencies, other dimensions of reality, accessible to you in this very moment. The fourth dimension introduces the idea that time isn't a straight line from past to future. It's more like an ocean where all moments exist simultaneously, and you're simply navigating through different coordinates. The fifth dimension goes even further. It's the frequency where you begin to directly perceive that separation itself is an illusion. That every person you encounter, every situation you experience, is fundamentally connected to you in ways that transcend physical proximity. Not metaphorically connected, literally, structurally, quantum mechanically connected. Now, before you dismiss this as mystical nonsense, let's bring in some science. In the early 20th century, physicists stumbled onto something that shattered their understanding of reality. They discovered that at the quantum level, particles don't behave like solid objects. Instead, they exist in what's called a superposition, a state where all possible outcomes exist simultaneously until someone observes them. This is the famous double-slit experiment. When scientists weren't watching, particles behaved like waves of probability, passing through multiple slits at once. But the moment they tried to observe which slit the particle went through, it collapsed into a single, definite position. The act of observation literally determined the outcome. Think about what that means. Consciousness, the simple act of paying attention, changes physical reality, not in some subtle, invisible way. In a measurable, repeatable, scientifically verified way. Your awareness is not a passive observer of reality. It's an active participant in creating it. This brings us to one of the most challenging concepts we'll explore today. The idea that everyone in your reality is, in a very real sense, a reflection of you. Now, I know that sounds egocentric, maybe even absurd. Obviously, other people exist independently, right? They have their own thoughts, their own lives, their own consciousness. But here's the nuance. You never actually interact with other people directly. You interact with your perception of them, filtered through your beliefs, your assumptions, your emotional states. Two people can meet the same individual and have completely opposite experiences. One person finds them warm and trustworthy. Another finds them cold and suspicious. Same person, different perceptions, different realities. What determines which version you experience? Your internal state, your assumptions about them, about yourself, about how relationships work, about what you deserve. These aren't just psychological preferences. They're energetic signatures that quite literally draw specific versions of people into your experience. Let's take a concrete example. Imagine you have a colleague at work who constantly undermines your projects. Every meeting, they find a way to criticize your ideas, take credit for your work, or sabotage your efforts. From a third-dimensional perspective, this person is the problem. They're toxic. They're the reason you're unhappy at work. But from a fifth-dimensional perspective, that colleague is showing you something about yourself. Maybe there's a part of you that doesn't believe you deserve success. Maybe you're unconsciously expecting betrayal because you've been betrayed before. Maybe you're holding onto resentment or insecurity that manifests as external conflict. Now here's where it gets really wild. When you genuinely shift your internal assumption about that colleague, when you stop seeing them as an adversary and start seeing them as neutral or even supportive, they change. Not because you manipulated them psychologically, not because you had a heartfelt conversation, but because you've tuned into a different frequency where a different version of them exists. This has been tested thousands of times by people who have studied these principles. Difficult bosses become mentors. Distant partners become affectionate. Rebellious children become cooperative. Not through external action, but through internal assumption held with emotional conviction. This is the essence of what some traditions call the law of assumption. You assume something is true. You persist in that assumption until it feels more real than the current circumstances, and eventually external reality reorganizes itself to match your assumption. But there's a crucial distinction here. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations repeated mechanically while you secretly believe the opposite. It's about a genuine shift in your felt sense of reality. It's not hoping things will get better. It's operating from the frequency where they already are better and simply allowing the physical world to catch up. The man who brought these ideas into modern consciousness was named Neville Goddard. Born in Barbados in the early 1900s, Goddard spent decades studying with mystical teachers, particularly an Ethiopian rabbi named Abdullah, who was a master of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. Goddard distilled centuries of esoteric knowledge into practical, applicable techniques that anyone could use. He made a distinction between what he called the law and the promise. The law is the mechanism. Imagining with feeling creates reality. You assume the state of your wish fulfilled, you feel it as present and real, and the external world must reflect it. This part can be learned, practiced, mastered, but the promise is something deeper. It's the spontaneous awakening to your true nature as the creative consciousness itself. It's not you using techniques to get what you want. It's the realization that you are the one creating all of it. Every person, every circumstance, every experience. You're not a limited human trying to manifest things. You're infinite consciousness experiencing itself as human. Goddard described his own awakening as a literal explosion in his head, followed by the direct perception of being everyone and everything simultaneously. He said it wasn't a hallucination or a psychotic break. It was a permanent expansion of consciousness that completely transformed his relationship to reality. Now, most spiritual teachings stop at the law. They give you manifestation techniques, vision boards, affirmations, scripting exercises, and those can work to a degree, but they keep you operating from the perspective of a separate self trying to manipulate external reality. The promise dissolves that separation entirely. When you experientially understand that everyone in your life is an aspect of your own consciousness projected outward, everything changes. Conflict becomes impossible because there's no one to fight with except yourself. Judgment dissolves because you're only ever judging your own reflection. Victimhood becomes absurd because there's no external force acting upon you. You're the author, the actor, and the audience of your own experience. This is where ancient mystical traditions and modern physics start saying the same thing in different languages. The Hermetic principle of as above so below wasn't poetic metaphor. It was a literal description of how patterns repeat across dimensional scales. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. Your inner world creates your outer world. Your assumptions about reality determine what reality you experience. The Kabbalistic tradition mapped 10 emanations of divine consciousness, 10 dimensions or frequencies through which creation unfolds. Practitioners learn to navigate between these states not through physical travel, but through shifts in perception, through specific techniques of meditation and visualization. They understood thousands of years ago what quantum physics is only now beginning to grasp. That consciousness is fundamental, and matter is derivative. Early Christianity, before it was institutionalized and sanitized, taught something radically different from modern religion. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, he wasn't offering moral advice. He was giving technical instruction. Access to higher states of consciousness, to divine awareness, to creative power, is found internally, not externally. The Gnostic texts, deliberately excluded from the official biblical canon and hidden for centuries until their rediscovery in 1945, reveal teachings about multiple dimensions, about the illusory nature of physical matter, about how thought and emotion directly shape experience. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was sophisticated understanding of consciousness technology. So why wasn't this taught in schools? Why did the majority of humanity spend centuries operating in ignorance of their true nature? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary to understand. The educational system, particularly in the Western world, was designed not to liberate consciousness, but to constrain it. The Prussian model of education that spread globally in the 19th century was explicitly created to produce obedient workers, not independent thinkers. John D. Rockefeller, one of the architects of modern education, openly stated his goal: "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." The curriculum emphasizes memorization over understanding, conformity over creativity, competition over collaboration. Newtonian physics is taught as absolute truth, while quantum mechanics is relegated to advanced specialization. Consciousness is treated as an epiphenomenon of brain chemistry, not as a causal force. Generation after generation has been conditioned to accept limitation as reality, to see themselves as separate, powerless, subject to external forces beyond their control. And this conditioning is reinforced constantly through media, through culture, through social pressure. Mystical experiences are pathologized as mental illness. Spontaneous manifestations are dismissed as coincidence. Questions about the nature of reality are ridiculed as magical thinking. The result is a population operating at a fraction of its potential, defending its own limitations as rationality. But something is changing, rapidly, undeniably. If you've been paying attention over the last few years, you've noticed an acceleration, not just in technology or information flow, but in the breakdown of old structures. Economic systems that seemed stable are revealing their fragility. Political narratives that went unquestioned are being exposed as fabrications. Institutions that demanded obedience are losing legitimacy. At the same time, more people are reporting strange experiences, intense synchronicities, prophetic dreams, sudden shifts in perception where reality feels more fluid, more responsive, physical symptoms without medical explanation, electrical sensations in the body, pressure in the head, heightened sensitivity to energy and emotion. These aren't random occurrences. They're symptoms of a collective shift in consciousness. Humanity as a whole is transitioning from third-dimensional awareness to fifth-dimensional awareness. And that transition isn't smooth or comfortable. When your consciousness begins operating at a higher frequency, your physical body has to adapt. The nervous system recalibrates to process subtler information. The pineal gland, calcified in most adults through fluoride exposure and cultural programming, begins to decalcify. This produces intense pressure in the center of the head, visions with closed eyes, perception of light in complete darkness. You become acutely sensitive to energy. You walk into a room and immediately feel the emotional atmosphere regardless of what people are saying. You have conversations where you hear the words but also perceive the unspoken intentions, the hidden fears, the denied truths. Your relationship to food changes. Things you ate for decades without issue suddenly cause immediate negative reactions if their vibrational frequency doesn't match your new state. Meat creates mental fog. Refined sugar produces emotional turbulence. Alcohol temporarily crashes your frequency back into lower dimensional experience. Sleep becomes strange. You wake at specific times, 3:33 or 4:44, not randomly, but because these are moments when the veil between dimensions is thinnest. Dreams become vivid, prophetic, showing events that manifest days or weeks later exactly as you dreamed them. Decision-making transforms completely. You stop relying on logical analysis and start following energetic resonance. Job offers that look perfect on paper produce physical nausea if they're misaligned. People who everyone praises generate inexplicable repulsion if they operate at incompatible frequencies. Conversely, opportunities that seem illogical and paths that seem impossible create unmistakable energetic expansion when aligned with your trajectory. And here's the challenging part. Relationships based on lower dimensional frequencies simply dissolve, often abruptly, without logical explanation. The person disappears from your life as if they never existed, because in the frequency you now inhabit, they don't exist in that form anymore. This can be brutal. Friendships of decades end. Romantic partnerships implode. Family members question your sanity. You find yourself unable to participate in conversations about victimhood and limitation. Social gatherings become exercises in restraint while others discuss problems you recognize as self-created. You inhabit two worlds simultaneously. The third-dimensional world where you must function physically, and the fifth-dimensional world where you operate consciously. Learning to navigate between them takes time, practice, refinement. But with each conscious choice, each refusal to accept limitation as reality, each moment of maintaining elevated frequency despite contrary appearances, the new state becomes more stable, more natural, more inevitable. So what do you actually do with this information? First, recognize that intellectual understanding is only the beginning. You can memorize every concept, quote every teacher, explain dimensions and frequencies with academic eloquence, and still remain completely trapped in third-dimensional consciousness. Real transformation occurs through application, through practice, through the consistent choice to operate from higher frequency regardless of what physical senses report. Start by observing your assumptions, not just your conscious thoughts, but the deeper beliefs that govern your emotional responses. When someone cuts you off in traffic, what's your automatic assumption? When a project fails, what story do you tell yourself? When a relationship struggles, where does your mind go? These automatic reactions reveal your operating frequency. They show you which version of reality you're tuned into. And here's the key insight. You're not stuck there. You can choose differently. This is where the practice of assumption becomes practical. Instead of reacting from your conditioned pattern, you consciously assume a different state. The rude driver becomes someone having a terrible day who needs compassion. The failed project becomes redirection towards something better. The struggling relationship becomes an opportunity for deeper intimacy. You don't just think these thoughts superficially. You feel them. You persist in the feeling until it becomes more real than the circumstance. And you watch as external reality reorganizes itself to match. But here's what most people miss. The feeling has to be present tense, not future hope. If you're feeling "I will be abundant," You're operating from the frequency of lack trying to reach abundance. But if you feel I am abundant now, regardless of current bank balance, you're operating from the frequency where abundance already exists. And the quantum field has no choice but to reflect that frequency back to you. This is why moments of absolute certainty produce instant manifestations. When you know something is yours, when you feel it as already accomplished fact, time collapses. Things that should take years according to third-dimensional logic occur in days or hours. The perfect job appears. The ideal house becomes available. The impossible relationship manifests through circumstances no physical action could have orchestrated. Not because the universe is conspiring in your favor, but because you've shifted timelines by shifting your dominant emotional state. Deep meditative practice becomes essential here. Not meditation as escape or relaxation, but meditation as access to the creative void, the field of infinite potential where all timelines exist simultaneously. When your brainwaves decelerate from agitated beta to relaxed alpha, then deep theta, finally transcendent delta, you literally tune into frequencies where reprogramming occurs at the cellular level. This is where you can impress new patterns onto the quantum field, where you can dissolve old limitations, where you can commune with higher dimensional aspects of yourself that see the bigger picture. And this is where we reach something important. All of this, everything we've discussed, is not theoretical. It's operational, it's testable, it's verifiable through your own direct experience. You don't have to believe anything I've said. In fact, belief is often an obstacle. Belief implies doubt. Knowing is certainty. And certainty is the frequency of manifestation. So here's my invitation. For the next 7 days, choose one assumption that contradicts your current reality. Maybe it's I am financially abundant. Maybe it's I am deeply loved. Maybe it's I am radiantly healthy. Whatever feels most alive for you, don't affirm it mechanically. Feel it. Persist in the feeling regardless of contrary evidence. Notice what happens. Notice the synchronicities. Notice the unexpected opportunities. Notice how people change their behavior toward you without you saying a word. And if nothing seems to happen, look more carefully. Because the shifts are often subtle at first. A thought pattern that used to dominate suddenly loses its grip. An anxiety that felt permanent begins to dissolve. A person who was difficult becomes neutral. These are the early signals that you're operating from a different frequency, that you're collapsing a different timeline into your experience, that you're beginning to consciously create rather than unconsciously react. Remember, you've been doing this your entire life. Every experience you've ever had was first a feeling, a belief, an assumption that crystallized into form. The only difference now is awareness. The only shift is from accidental creation to deliberate mastery. The truth is, we're living through a moment of unprecedented transformation. The old world, built on separation and control and limitation, is dissolving. Not because of external forces, but because consciousness itself is evolving. Humanity is remembering what it forgot, that we're not powerless beings subject to random circumstances. We're creative consciousness experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. And as more people awaken to this truth, as more individuals begin operating from fifth-dimensional frequency, the collective field shifts. What was once impossible becomes normal. What was once hidden becomes obvious. What was once feared becomes embraced. You're part of this shift, not passively but actively. Every time you choose love over fear, abundance over scarcity, unity over separation, you're anchoring higher frequency into physical reality. You're literally changing the collective timeline through your individual frequency. This isn't New Age fantasy. It's how consciousness works. It's how reality has always worked. The only thing that's changed is your awareness of it. So the question isn't whether these principles are true. The question is, what will you do with them? Will you continue operating unconsciously, reacting to circumstances as if they're happening to you? Or will you step into conscious mastery, recognizing that you're the one creating the circumstances. The choice, as always, is yours, but now you know. You can't unknow it. And that knowing will continue to expand, to deepen, to transform everything you thought you understood about yourself and reality. Welcome to the fifth dimension. You've always been here. You're just now beginning to remember.